What is up, everybody? This is your boy, Teran Rodriguez, bringing you another edition of Set Point. We have ourselves a jam-packed show this week, as we've got lots of volleyball to discuss, such as Loyola versus Newport Harbor in the CIF SoCal Regional Division 1 Championship. Which team came out on top, and which team will pretty much be crowned the national champion of high school boys volleyball. And we have NVA this weekend, as event number 3 will be taking place. Facing off against each other in event number 3 is Texas and Team Freedom. Will Texas come out on top, or will Team Freedom emerge victorious in the battle of unbeatens? We've got some AVP to discuss as well. And how about Taryn, Kloth, and Kristen, Nuss taking the beach volleyball tournament by storm? They win another tournament. It's their first in the challenge bracket. NVA Volleyball set the next. Let's discuss some volleyball action here on Set. This is Teran Rodriguez bringing you another edition of Set here on iSports Radio. Your lead and all that is sports. And welcome all to another edition of Set Point. I hope you all are having a great Wednesday afternoon, great Wednesday evening, great Wednesday, depending on where you are listening from. I know I am. I apologize for those that were looking forward to listening to Set Point on Monday live, but unfortunately things got in the way, so I had to move Set Point to Wednesday, but it is no big deal. Regardless, we are here live with Set Point episode 143. Without any further delay, let's get on into that volleyball action. But first and foremost, a word from our sponsor. iSports Radio is proud to call the Southern California Warriors semi-pro football team the official sponsor of iSports Radio. The world of semi-pro sports is unlike any other sports organization. Players pay to play in hopes of so many different outcomes, whether it's playing to get film to trap for professional teams, big-time colleges, or just playing to stay in shape. No matter what, all semi-pro players have one thing in common, and that's playing for the love of the game. The SoCal Warriors have been on a quest to earn titles and give players second chances since 2017. Whether you're in Southern California or anywhere in the world, give semi-pro sports a chance if you love your sport. You may get the second chance you've been waiting for as an athlete. You can follow them on Twitter at SoCal Warriors, on Instagram at Southern California_Warriors, and on Facebook by typing in the word Southern California and then Warriors. iSports Radio is available on Twitter and on Instagram at iSports Radio, and on Facebook by typing in the word IE, then sports, then radio. They also have a website, www.iesportsradio.com, and when you go there, you will see a Patreon link, which starts out at $5 a month. This donation will get you a shout-out from all 31 of our shows, and higher tiers will include iSports Radio merchandise, access to IESRU, the podcasting university of iSports Radio, and even a chance to be featured on iSports Radio's flagship show, The Defining Moment with Larry B. Because for the past 8 years, iSports Radio has been bringing you amazing content, ranging from interviewing legendary athletes, coaches, and other authorized media personnel, to building tailor-made shows dedicated to all major sports cities around the country. All the while, iSports Radio has been continued to be by the fans and for the fans, and with your help, we are ready to take the next biggest step. Thank you to everyone for continuing to make iSports Radio your direct feed for all that is sports. And we have 4 Patreon supporters as of right now: Bay Area Raised Apparel, Marcus Lostrate, Key to the Gate, and an anonymous supporter. We also have to give a shout out to iSports Radio's Fan of the Month, Justin Ekstrom. His Twitter is at thesportscrib21. He is a Minnesota Vikings fan who hails from Minnesota, and we definitely congratulate him on his honor. Also, we would like to thank everyone once again for making iSports Radio's 8th anniversary so special. Here's to many more anniversaries and many more special years to come. So now, without any further delay, let's get on into that volleyball action. We're going to start off with the high school volleyball scene, just because that was pretty much the most recent, and it's pretty much what I attended on Saturday. So, the high school boys volleyball match of the year was Loyola versus Newport Harbor at Newport Harbor High School. It's the CIF SoCal Regional Division I Championship. Newport Harbor got to the championship by defeating Servite in the first round, then Beckman in the semifinals, and Loyola got there by defeating Palisades in the first round and Cathedral Catholic of San Diego in the semifinals. How would these two teams fare in the final? Let's get on into it. So the first set was rather, I don't know how to say this, interesting to say the least. Now, before going into this match, I just want to say Loyola was without Sean Kelly, who is training with the U.S. U19 men's volleyball team as they're in Guatemala, and they are playing as of right now. They are playing Mexico, and they're currently 2-0 as of this podcast recording. That's live, of course. At the same time, Newport Harbor wasn't 100% either. They had a few guys that were sick, but that didn't really deter them when it came to their playoff run in the SoCal Regionals. So the first set, Loyola took an early 3-1 lead, but then that lead vanished rather quickly as once Newport Harbor got the ball back, Luca Curci was just serving up a storm. Like, Luca Curci's serve is just dynamic. It's like a cannon, to say the least. It's just, if you're not ready for it, you're going to get aced. And he was just serving up just a straight-up storm. He was wheeling and dealing, and that really flustered the Loyola serve-receive. And in the defense of Loyola, they were playing on the road, and it's tough to pass in Newport Harbor's gym. And also, the gymnasium was standing room only. It was just bananas. It was literally a national championship. Like, the student section was so... I think it filled up like half the bleachers at Newport Harbor, if not a third of the bleachers. And even the Loyola side was pretty filled up for the most part. Either way, it was a packed house. It wasn't really standing room only. I was sitting for the most part, but every student from Loyola and Newport Harbor was hyped. But the Sailor students were very hyped after Newport Harbor just steamrolled their way through set one. I want to say they led by as many as like 11 or 12. Either way, they really let Loyola have it that first set, as they won at 25-15. I was very impressed that Newport Harbor had such a strong start. I wasn't aware of the fact that Loyola was without Sean Kelly until someone informed me, and it's like, oh, okay. I mean, Loyola looked good without him. Loyola got to the final without Sean Kelly. Like, they have other talented players. They're not going to roll over. And obviously one of those talented players was Dylan Klein, who was just pounding kill off the left side, kill off the left side, kill off the left side. Like, he was just trying to will Loyola to winning a set. And Loyola's best chance of winning a set was set two. Like, they were down for a little part of the set, and they started to pick it up as they got their block going. Newport Harbor was making a couple mistakes. They eventually went up, I want to say they went up 16-15, and they eventually went up 20-18 as Newport Harbor had to call timeout. This was at the part of the game where I was thinking, okay, well, Loyola woke up. They're playing a whole lot better. I think this is where they take a set off Newport. No. Newport Harbor scored 3 straight points to force a Loyola timeout as they led 21-20. It eventually was tied up at 21-21. Newport Harbor used another 3-0 run to go up 24-21. But something that Newport Harbor kind of struggled with some of the season was closing out. Like, they had a couple matches where they had to basically go to deuce games, and they missed a serve, and then they had a hitting error, which brought Loyola to within one. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, Loyola is going to make a comeback because Newport Harbor is shooting themselves in the foot. Unfortunately for Loyola, they missed their next serve. I don't know if Newport Harbor coach Eric Valley was calling timeout to ice the server or just calling timeout to give his team a breather or to draw up a game plan. But either way, the timeout worked as Newport Harbor took set 2, 25-23, leading the match 2-0. And then set 3 was just pretty much all Newport Harbor. They were just really strong. Their blocking was great. Their serving really picked up. I don't have the stats in front of me, but I want to say they had a good chunk of aces. I want to say they had nearly 10. All I can tell you is that they held Loyola to 0 service aces, and that is a very tough thing to do, especially against a team like Loyola. Last week I said Loyola serves like an NCAA men's volleyball team, and for Newport Harbor to hold Loyola to 0 service aces speaks to high volumes of how Newport Harbor has drastically improved. Eventually, Newport Harbor got to match point. They needed just 2 match points to close the match as Luca Kirchi, the UCLA-bound outside hitter who's only a junior, got the kill from the left side to give Newport Harbor set number 3, 25-14, and the match. I was very surprised Newport Harbor won in 3. Now, obviously, Newport Harbor has drastically improved. You can't compare Newport Harbor currently right now all the way back to the start of the season. That's totally comparing apples to oranges. So the fact that Newport Harbor really played such a complete game and they passed really well, that was the key right there. Newport Harbor passed so well that it was any wonder that Loyola didn't have a service ace. Their serve receive was just cooked to perfection, and they really were just strong. Jake Reed also had himself a big game. And like I said, Luca Kirchi, the junior, stepped up. Jake Reed is also a junior as well. James Eady had himself a big game in the middle. And he also dealt a service ace as well. So overall, I think it was just Newport Harbor's best game of the season. And they saved their best for last. And honestly, they couldn't have played a much better game against a very talented opponent such as Loyola. Now bear in mind, Loyola was number 1 in the nation despite them losing not last week, but the previous week, where they lost in the Southern Section Finals. And Newport Harbor was still number 2 in the nation, despite them winning the Southern Section against Loyola. But this really put the exclamation point on Newport Harbor being the number 1 team. And it was just announced today, on Wednesday, May 25th, that Newport Harbor was indeed the national champions, and sure enough, they deserve it. They played such a tough schedule. They had themselves an up and down season. They had a few injuries to start out the season. A few of their players got sick. I think it was just one player got sick the week before the final. He unfortunately could not play, but overall, Newport Harbor just had themselves a great season. They really turned it around, and I really think their turning point of the season was losing to Los Alamitos on the road in 5 sets. I wouldn't say if they don't lose that, they wouldn't have this same ending. But I really think that loss to Los Al really woke up Newport Harbor, because they left disappointed, wondering why the heck did we not close this team like we did other teams. And I really think that Newport Harbor had a big chip on their shoulder after losing that match. They ended the match on an 8-game winning streak. They finished 28-5, and overall, they really impressed, and they had themselves a strong end to the season. Sometimes it doesn't matter how you start, it's how you finish, and that's a definite old saying that is true to perfection. And like I said, Newport Harbor definitely deserves to be national champions. I'm not trying to be a homer toward them, but they really earned it. Yes, they lost 5 matches, but a few of those matches were tournament matches. I want to say they only had 2 losses coming from tournament matches, which were best 2 out of 3. They only lost 3 best of 5 matches, one of which was to Loyola, where Loyola just stomped all over Newport Harbor in a regular season game. And then their other 2 losses came against Modern Day, which actually finished number 4 in the nation. And then they also lost to Los Alamitos, which finished top 25 in the nation. So overall, it was just a great season for Newport Harbor, and they have lots to be proud about. The scary part about Newport Harbor is that they bring back a good chunk of their players. They return Jake Reed, they return Luca Curci, they have a setter that actually got to see play. I was just saying this on Twitter after the match. I was saying Newport Harbor returns a good chunk of their players, and I really think that this team has the potential. The only big question mark is their libero. I don't know what their libero situation is going to be like, but I imagine they're just going to bring up someone from the underclassmen level, aka JV or Frostsoff, and they're going to breed him into being a very good libero. It'll take time, though, but I really think that the Sailors' future is bright. And something else I alluded to when it comes to Newport Harbor boys volleyball is I think it's high time we start calling Newport Harbor a blue blood when it comes to high school boys volleyball. Now, everyone loves to have this argument of blue bloods when it comes to NCAA basketball, like Kansas, UCLA, Gonzaga, even though they're not really the best blue blood in the world, Kentucky, North Carolina. The list goes on and on. Everyone likes to have that blue blood argument. I kind of had that little blue blood discussion on Twitter. I basically said it's time we include Newport Harbor in the blue blood category because they've been to 4 straight Division I finals. The last team to accomplish that was Corona Del Mar, their rival, who I think is a blue blood. More on that later, but Newport Harbor really deserves to be a blue blood. They've won 5 CIF Southern Section championships, 2 of which have come pretty much in the past decade. Well, not decade, but the past 10 years. Like, their last one came prior to 2019, came in 1999 when it beat its rival Corona Del Mar, but that was way back then. This time around, Newport Harbor is looking like the premier team as of right now. Now, obviously, a lot can happen going into the next off-season, which is going to last 9 or so months, but I really think Newport Harbor has it made. They have Luca Curci returning, like I said, Jake Reed, Corbin Francisco, their setter, looks good. Their 2 middles got playing time in Lucas Johnson and Carter Moore. Carter Moore even got finals experience, which is very key right there. And then Lucas Johnson is obviously going to improve better. The only question mark is the libero, and obviously losing James Eady, the CIF Co-Player of the Year, is kind of going to be tough to fill, considering he had that spark, which gave Newport Harbor that oomph. And then Cole McKibben was a great setter. He had a nice little float serve, and he really propelled the offense well. He basically was the Patrick Mahomes of setters when it came to this team, and I really think that he did a great job. And one player who does deserve a lot of credit is Sean McCarthy, the libero. Now, Newport Harbor had a little bit of a libero situation. They had one libero starting, and then their coach kind of shuffled everything around. I don't know what the idea was in that, but it eventually worked, as Sean McCarthy was the libero. According to Eric Valley at his banquet, he said that it was a science experiment, and it seems as though that science experiment worked, and look at what happened. So, overall, I just thought Newport Harbor had a great season, and everything they did was correct. They prepared well for opponents. They had their bad loss, which obviously was against Los Alamitos. They didn't really lose that way again. They didn't lose at all when it came after that match. And they even got to play Los Alamitos again, which they wound up beating in the quarterfinals of the Southern Section playoffs in 5 sets. So, overall, Newport Harbor is your national champion, and credit goes to Eric Valley. He does deserve a lot of credit, as this is only his second full year as head coach. Like, obviously he's been coaching for 3 years as head coach, but you gotta remember 2020, the COVID year, kind of took everything away. So I think his first 2 full years, it's quite impressive of what he's done with the program, and I really think that the Sailors can continue to go up from here. And it's scary to see what this team has in store for the entire world. As long as everything stays intact, I think that Newport Harbor is going to be good for years to come. Now, for the Loyola side, obviously it was so tough for them to lose. I kind of felt bad for them, more so for one player, but more on that later. But I kind of understand that they did not have one of their top hitters in Sean Kelly. But to me, I really thought Newport Harbor played a complete game. Am I saying with Sean Kelly, Loyola would have won? Not really, but it would have made the match a little bit more interesting. But again, like I said, Newport Harbor had players battling sickness throughout most of the week, and Loyola coach Michael Boley didn't even make that as an excuse. He said, we had to make do with what we got. Like, we had to play without Sean Kelly, and there's no excuse. And that's very noble of him to say. Obviously, it's just tough to not have such a talented player like Sean Kelly, who's only a sophomore. And obviously, they had to bank on quite a bit of players such as Dylan Klein and Ryan Venna and a couple other players as well. Overall, it was just so tough for Loyola to lose that way, especially on the road getting swept. Now, in their defense, it's tough playing at Newport Harbor, and in front of a raucous crowd like that, it's very, very difficult. However, Loyola has been battle-tested, and obviously this just wasn't their night. Loyola also had contributions from Owen Lonecar, as well as Luke Morley. Like, this is a senior-laden Loyola class, and 5 of their players are going to be playing Division I volleyball. So overall, it's such a tough way for Loyola to go out. But I really think Loyola is going to be back on the big stage next year. Like, this is a Loyola team. This Loyola team is perennially good. The last time they didn't make the Southern Section semifinals, or the last time they didn't even make the SoCal Regionals, 2011, which was my senior year, where Loyola got knocked out of the first round against St. John Bosco, a.k.a. the Football Factory. But I digress. So, yeah, it's been that long since Loyola has not sniffed the... I'm sorry, I shouldn't say it like that. It's been that long since Loyola has missed the SoCal Regionals. And even that year, the Trinity League as a whole was really good. So I really don't think Loyola is going anywhere, especially with some of the talent that they are returning. They returned their libero Grant Stewart-Wald. They returned Sean Kelly, who is a dynamic player. I really think this Loyola team has what it takes to make it back to the finals next year. It is going to be tough to replace a very talented player such as Dylan Klein, and I really felt bad for him. I really wish he could have gone out as a CIF champion. I kind of compare Dylan to Cole Pender, except a little bit more, or quite a bit more athletic. I really think Dylan Klein is one of the more dynamic volleyball players I've seen, not from Newport Harbor. I really think he has the potential to lead USC. And coming along with the ride with him to USC is the setter of Loyola, Ryan Sprague, who will be joining him at USC. And I really think that Dylan Klein has a bright future ahead of him. I think he can maybe take his talent professionally after his college volleyball career. Now, I'm not trying to put him on a pedestal, but I really think Dylan is a fantastic player. And this one loss does not define him as a player, and it doesn't define Loyola as a team. I really think Loyola had a great season. For them to only have 2 losses going into the Southern Section Final is quite impressive. And honestly, I think this team, it just, first of all, it starts off at the top. Michael Boley does such a great job with this program. Like, I don't even know how many years he's been coaching, but he's been coaching there for a while, and it's just so impressive that Loyola continues to just be this perennial team that makes the semifinals. From 2012 all the way to now, they have made the Southern Section semifinals, which has basically granted them access to playing in the state playoffs or the SoCal Regionals. But overall, I like Loyola's program. It's a great program. It's a perennial powerhouse. It's one you don't want to bet against. And I really think that Loyola will be back on the big stage. I really think that. As for their match against Newport Harbor last Saturday, I just think that it wasn't so that Loyola played bad. It was just Newport Harbor just played so impressive. They really strut their stuff on their home floor. They knew they wanted to win on their home floor after Loyola embarrassed them way back in the middle of March. So I really think that Loyola, it wasn't the case of Loyola being bad, albeit they had a few errors, but it was just the case of Newport Harbor just having themselves a great match, them passing really well, them serving up a storm, them hitting the ball timely and well, and just having themselves a complete game. I really think Loyola impressed me a lot this year, and I really think this Loyola team will be remembered. I just hate that one team had to lose, and one team's, I wouldn't say legacy was tarnished, but I think both Newport Harbor and Loyola are quite impressive. And who knows, maybe we have a rivalry going. Like, we obviously have Newport Harbor and Mira Costa as longtime rivals. Maybe this rivalry will be the rivalry of this generation. And then obviously Newport Harbor has their rivalry with Corona Del Mar, but that's a league rivalry. That's obviously a rivalry right there. But this is probably one of the more underrated rivalries in my opinion, and I think as long as Loyola and Newport Harbor are still keeping their programs clean and they're both like continuing to do great things, I think that these two teams could meet in the finals or sometime down the road in the playoffs in the near future. And I think that would be great volleyball because obviously people love to see Newport Harbor versus Mira Costa or Newport Harbor versus CDM or CDM versus Loyola or whatnot. But I think it would be quite unique to see Newport Harbor and Loyola. I don't think there's been a year where Newport Harbor and Loyola have faced each other in the finals prior to this year. I'm 95% certain on that. I'd have to confirm that, but I'm pretty sure this is the first year we've seen Newport Harbor versus Loyola in the finals. And I think it's a really good thing. It's a beautiful thing, honestly. So, to close the book on Loyola, I think their senior class left their mark on the Loyola boys volleyball program, and I think Loyola is going to be coming back stronger than ever next year. Obviously, they're going to have a whole different supporting cast. Obviously, they're going to have a new setter, new middle, new everything. But I think Loyola is going to come back, and I feel that they're going to be one of the top teams. They're always going to be one of the top teams in California due to the fact that they have such a great coach, they have a great culture, and they just reload. They don't rebuild, they reload. So overall, I think Loyola is going to be a team to watch for next year, and don't sleep on the Newport Harbor Loyola rivalry. I already know that their next non-league or their next regular season contest, looking ahead to 2023, is going to be held at Loyola just because last year they had it at Loyola, this year they had it at Newport Harbor, now next year is going to be at Loyola, and it's going to be a dogfight. I imagine they'll have it on a Saturday just because I don't think Newport Harbor wants to go from Newport Beach to Los Angeles on a weekday. Unless they really have to, and they have to, like, hit the 405 to the City of Angels on a weekday. Which, if that's the case, then they're going to have to leave pretty early because LA traffic is a nightmare. But I digress. So that is going to do it for the high school boys volleyball season. Overall, I enjoyed this match. I enjoyed the Loyola versus Newport Harbor matchups, not just from last Saturday, but the previous Saturday. And I wish nothing but the best for the seniors going forward. Whether they're playing college volleyball or not, I really wish the seniors nothing but the best, especially Dylan Klein. I really, like I said last week, I have a soft spot for Dylan. I really think he is a talent unmatched, and he's going to do great things for USC. I don't want to put him on a pedestal right now, and I don't want to make early predictions, but I hope he does get MPSF Freshman of the Year. He has that potential, It's just all about seeing what he could bring to the table. So we'll see. All right, so that's going to close the book on the high school boys volleyball season. I know I really talked mainly about California, but those were the top 2 teams in the nation, and most of the top 25 of MaxPreps came from California, as the number 1 and number 2 teams are Loyola and Newport Harbor, and there's no denying that. So overall, that's pretty much that. I mean, I guess we can go over the top 25. So the top 25 of MaxPreps in terms of boys volleyball, 25 through 21 consist of Elder of Cincinnati, Redondo Union, Miracosta, Los Alamitos, and Royal of Simi Valley. 20 through 16 consist of Buchanan of Clovis, Huntington Beach, Corona del Mar, Cardinal Gibbons of Fort Lauderdale, and Upland. 15 through 11 consist of Punahou of Honolulu, Hawaii. 14 consists of Highland of Gilbert, Arizona. 13 consists of Servite. 12 consists of Lake Mary of Florida. And 11 consists of Clovis west of Fresno. 10 through 6 consists of Freedom of Orlando, Florida. Cathedral Catholic of San Diego. Beckman of Irvine. Winter Park of Winter Park, Florida. And Mountain View of Northern California. Then 5 through 1 consists of Sandra Day O'Connor of Phoenix, Arizona at 5. Mater Day, the football factory, who is now a boys volleyball factory, at 4. St. Francis of Mountain View in NorCal at 3. Loyola of Los Angeles at 2. And I pretty much alluded to this. The new number 1 team of the nation on via MaxPreps is none other than Newport Harbor of Newport Beach. So that's pretty much your top 25 to end the season. And that's pretty much that for the high school boys volleyball scene. Let us jump on into some beach volleyball talk, as once again, Taryn Kloth and Kristen Nuss continue to take the beach volleyball scene by storm, as they won another tournament, as they managed to win the Kudasi tournament, as this was actually their first tournament championship won at the challenge level, and it was their second FIVB win of the year. And it's very impressive that they continue to take the volleyball world by storm, the beach volleyball world by storm. I really think that they are doing great things for the sport of volleyball. They're so young as well. They're only like 2 years removed from college, and 1 full year removed from college, and they're just really doing well, and they're growing the game, and this is very, very, very impressive. And I really think that these two are going to make themselves household names. Now, obviously, once again, I'm not trying to put them on a pedestal, but I just think that them winning 2 FIVB tournaments is really impressive, and I want to say they're participating in the New Orleans Open, which should be a nice little homecoming for them just because they both went to LSU. I really think that would be quite fitting for them to win that tournament. It would be quite funny. Well, not like funny, but it would be quite interesting considering they both went to LSU and they both sit atop the most career wins at LSU. So we'll see what happens with those two. If they're not playing in the tournament, which I'll confirm after the commercial break, I will make note of that. But I really think that Nuss and Kloth are definitely playing great as of late. Now, their final match was rather dramatic, as the third set was basically a nail-biter, as they had to win that one 17-15. But overall, I think those two have they have what it's all about. They have that team chemistry, and they basically have that it factor. As we say hello to Davidson Crooks in the chat room, he says, "What's good?" Just talking some beach volleyball, as former LSU standouts Taryn Kloth and Kristen Nuss won another beach volleyball tournament on the pro level, and there's plenty more where that came from. I definitely think they're going to win at least another tournament in the coming beach volleyball season, and I really think that the sky's the limit with Nuss and Kloth. I want to say they're like in their early 20s. I want to say they're either in their early 20s or mid 20s. Either way, these two are phenomenal, and they could be the next. I'm not going to try to put them on a pedestal, but they could be the next April Ross and Alex Kleinman. But that is putting them on too high of a pedestal. We'll have to see what happens with them going forward. They're only in their 20s. The sky's the limit for them, and here's hoping that they can continue their success on the pro beach volleyball level. So that is that for some pro beach volleyball talk from this past week. We might as well jump into the AVP event that's coming up. But first, let's take ourselves a quick little commercial break. When we come back, we will discuss said AVP event, the New Orleans Open, and who is participating in that. Then we'll also break down some NVA matches. And then we also have 3 schedule releases, with one of which only being a non-conference schedule release. But regardless, it is still a schedule release. Davidson Crooks says Nuss and Kloth have got time, and that is something that is very valuable. They have plenty of time, and time is something that is very valuable. So either way, we're going to jump to a commercial break, and I'll see you on the other side. You're listening to Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that sports. We'll be right back after this.
From the shores of the Puget Sound to the rushing waters of the Columbia River, stretching across the Great Cascades, and on IE Sports Radio lives the Northwest Territory Sports Show, hosted by me, Brad Buckingham. On this show, I cover all the great collegiate and professional sport teams that we have here in the Pacific Northwest. Of course, I'm talking about the Seattle Seahawks, Seattle Mariners, Sounders, and even the Seattle Kraken. But I can't forget all of that is good in Oregon either. I got the Trailblazers, the Oregon Ducks, the Beavers, even the Timbers, and much, much more. You can listen to the show every Sunday from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern, noon to 1 p.m. Pacific on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
What is going on, everybody? My name is Harrison Glazer, and we're coming at you from the Show That Never Sleeps podcast. I cover the Jets, the Islanders, the Nets, and the Yankees.
This is Pierre Moss, and I cover the Mets, Knicks, Rangers, and the Giants.
Our show is live every Wednesday through Spreaker and a bunch of other ways to get our content. Again, we're the Show That Never Sleeps podcast. We talk about all those New York sports. It's a lot of fun. We get into all of it. Please tune in. Again, that's Wednesdays at 6 p.m.
And we look forward to having you guys right here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that is sports.
Back with segment number 2 of Set Point here on IE Sports Radio, your direct feed for all that sports. Definitely do check out our shows, Northwest Territory Sports and The Show That Never Sleeps, which actually went on earlier. It was only Harrison Glazer, as Pierre Moss had himself a situation that he had to take care of. Hope everything is going well with Pierre Moss. So jumping back into some beach volleyball talk. So the beach volleyball AVP New Orleans Open has been released. It's actually a 16 16-team tournament or 16-pair tournament, as Taryn, Kloth, and Kristen Nuss are in this tournament. They're actually the 2 seed overall, which, oh boy, if I'm them, I'm getting motivated because of seeing that. It's like, really, you're gonna seed us second, even though we just won our first challenge tournament in our careers? Like, come on. So, Teran, Kloth, and Kristen Nuss are the number 2 seed. The number 1 seed is actually Kelly Cheng and Betsy Flint. Now, you're probably wondering who Kelly Cheng is. So, Kelly Cheng is actually Kelly Clace, who just recently got married, I suppose. But overall, that's your number 1 seed, and that's going to be quite the interesting storyline right there. Like, Teran, Kloth, and Kristen Nuss are the number 2 seed. It's still a good seed. Like, number 2 is so much better than, like, getting, like, 4 seed or 4 or 5 seed or whatnot. So, I really think that Kloth and Nuss are going to use that as motivation to try to win the whole thing. Once again, this is the main draw, and there are 16 teams, and there is a contenders bracket. It's kind of like the NCAA beach volleyball tournament, except in the first round, even if you lose in the first round, you get sent to the contenders bracket. So you can lose once, but you can't lose twice until you reach the championship, where if you lose, then you basically lose. But I digress. So some notable names that I'm actually seeing is... I'm actually seeing quite a bit of college volleyball players such as Haley Harward, Abby Van Winkle, Megan Rice, Corinne Quiggle, even though she's not a college volleyball player anymore, but you get the point. I'm seeing quite a bit of college volleyball players that are jumping into this tournament, so I'm rather impressed that we're seeing quite a bit of college volleyball players just going from college volleyball season, which ended about a week or so ago, going into this NCAA, or not NCAA, AVP tournament, which is like, okay, that's cool. So, I guess they want to get that AVP career started as soon as possible. So, that's pretty much the women's side of things. So, the men's side of things will basically consist of the 16-team tournament. The number 1 seed is Dalhouser and Patterson. Now, obviously, we know who Phil Dalhouser is. Phil Dalhouser is the Slim Beast, a man who needs no introduction. He is absolutely amazing, as he is basically a Hall of Famer. Even at only 42 years of age, he continues to do great things. So, overall, I think that Phil Dalhouser and his new partner, are going to do great things. And Phil Dalhouser has had himself quite the career. He actually was partnered with Nick Lucena last year when it came to the AVP, but now this year he has a new partner, Casey Patterson, which I think is going to be a great dynamic duo. Like, Casey Patterson, as he was great by himself. Now he's getting paired up with Phil Dalhouser. Whew. That is going to be one scary 1 seed to try to conquer. So, that's basically your 1 seed right there when it comes to beach volleyball. The 2 seed is going to be Nick Lucena and his partner, Benish. So, Nick Lucena, as we all know, he is one of the top players in terms of beach volleyball. And Andy Benish is definitely... he's definitely meshing well with Nick Lucena very quickly, and those two are definitely having great cohesion. They had themselves a great first tournament in Texas. I really think that these two have what it takes to go deep in this tournament. I think they can go well. I just think that they're going to need to watch out for other pairs such as Taylor Crabb and Taylor Sander. Taylor Square, I guess I could call him Taylor Squared, I guess. They also have, surprisingly, no Trevor Crabb. So, but I think the dark horse would probably be Taylor Crabb and Taylor Sander. I think that's going to be a great little pair to watch for as well. And then you also have Avery Drost and Eric Buranak they actually pulled an upset in the first AVP tournament from a few weeks ago. For those of you that are from Manhattan Beach, Avery Drost's name does ring a couple bells because Avery Drost is the head coach of Miracosta Boys Volleyball, and he's a darn right good head coach. He's a very good head coach, and he's a very good AVP beach volleyball player as well. As I look forward to seeing what he could do. If he and Baranek can pull an upset like they did last week or a few weeks ago, I think that they could get themselves well known and they can put themselves on the map. I really am excited to see what Baranek and Drost can do. We'll see, though. We'll see. It's still pretty early, and, this is only the second AVP event, and there's a whole lot of AVP season to go. Like, this AVP season is going to be extended, and more importantly, there's going to be a lot of tournaments and a lot of tier tournaments. I mean, it's not like one tournament's going to be better than the other. I think it's going to be... all those tournaments are going to basically be the same. Every team wants to win that tournament. Every team wants to win said tournament, and it's going to be competitive. And when it comes to winning or losing said tournament, it's going to basically be... It's not going to be like, oh, the world's going to end. The sun will come up tomorrow, and there's going to be lots of events. Because after the New Orleans Open, June 11th through 12th is going to be a 2-day event where the AVP will be heading to Muskegon for the Muskegon Open. Then on July 2nd and 3rd, we've got the Denver Open. Then the following weekend, July 8th and 9th, we have the Waupaca Open. And then, they actually have two events. They have the Hermosa Beach Open and they have the Waupaca Open. That's quite impressive. They're having two AVP events. My goodness. And then July 23rd and 24th, they've got the Atlantic City Open. July 29th through the 31st, they've got the Fort Lauderdale Open for 3 days. Atlanta Open is August 5th through the 7th. August 19th through the 21st is probably going to be something that I look forward to. The Manhattan Beach Open, which maybe I'll attend. Maybe. And then the Virginia Beach Open is August 27th through the 28th. Chicago Open is September 2nd through 4th. Atlantic City Open, yet again, is September 16th through the 18th. September 23rd through the 24th is the Phoenix Championships. November 12th through 13th is going to be in my backyard, the Huntington Beach Open. And then November 19th and 20th is the end of the AVP season, as it's basically going to be the Clearwater Open. Davidson says, I guess he got some spare time to do this and coaching. Great job on setting the standard. Yeah, he's referring to Avery Drost. So, in the first AVP event that Avery Drost participated in, he actually had to miss his team playing in the Southern Section semifinals, which, that was obviously a bummer, but Miracosta has such a great coaching staff that Drost could afford to miss that semifinal just for his AVP event, because AVP is a once-in-a-lifetime event, a once-a-season event, and then Miracosta, like I said, they have a great coaching staff. They have Greg Snyder as a great assistant coach, and they have a longtime head coach in Michael Cook, no relation to John Cook or Keegan Cook, but Michael Cook is basically the standard of Miracosta boys volleyball. But back to Drost, yeah, he now has a lot of downtime after the high school boys volleyball season is over. So overall, Drost is definitely setting the standard, like Davidson said. He and Eric Baranek are definitely doing big things, and here's hoping that those two can make waves in the AVP season. Like, it would be great to have some parity in the AVP season with a few players just pulling off wins, which I think would be great for AVP. It's not going to be like the same thing over and over and over again. Not that I don't mind, like, the Dalhausers and the Lucenas winning, but you know what I mean. It would just be great to have some variety. So that's just my little take right there. But I am looking forward to the New Orleans Open. My only thing is, I wish it wasn't on the same weekend as the NVA. That kind of punches a hole in focusing on one thing. So now I have to focus on two other things. As the good news is for the AVP versus the NVA is that after the Muskegon Open, the AVP is not going to have an event till July, which the NVA actually has their fourth event the week after the Muskegon Open, so I could focus on one thing instead of having to split myself into focusing on the AVP and then going to NVA at the same time. So we'll see. And then I also heard that the AVP is going to might be televising some of these events via replay. This is what I've been hearing, and this is kind of a rumor. They said that they were going to be putting the matches on FS1 following the tournament, but this is kind of a rumor, so it's probably going to be the replay, so we'll see. But that is that for the AVP right there. Let's jump on into some college volleyball schedule releases. So we're going to go with the non-scheduled release from Michigan. So Michigan released its non-conference schedule last week. Their first match of the 2022 season will be against Old Dominion, which is a fairly new program. And I think it's going to be an interesting matchup. For those that don't know what happened to Michigan's season last year, they lost in the round of 64 to Ball State, a team that hadn't won an NCAA tournament match since the 90s. So Michigan has a lot of work to take care of. And then that same day, on August 26th, they'll play Northern Arizona. So interesting start to the season. Old Dominion in Northern Arizona. Not really the best start to the season, but I guess it'll do for Michigan. And then they also play UT, which it's not University of Texas, that's for sure. So it's an interesting schedule, as it's an interesting start to the schedule for Michigan volleyball, as it's not the strongest start to the schedule in my opinion. I think it's a fairly meh start to the season, but it is what it is, as they're playing Utah Tech. Now, Utah Tech is kind of interesting, as this is actually, all these matches are actually going to be playing in Flagstaff, Arizona, which is basically at NAU. Then the following weekend, they have their Michigan Invitational. They have Toledo to start off the Michigan Invitational, which is a solid team. And then that same day, on September 2nd, they have Morehead State. Their first interesting matchup, and I use interesting very loosely, is going to be against Loyola of Chicago on Saturday with a time to be determined. Now, Loyola is not like their men's team. Loyola of Chicago women's volleyball isn't like the men was this past season. But I think it would be a good early test. I still think Michigan wins that one just because they have a lot of good key players, one of which is May Pertovsky, just to name one. So overall, I think that Loyola of Chicago matchup is going to be a sneaky good matchup. Then the following week, Michigan heads down to North Carolina to take on the North Carolina schools. They've got Duke on Friday, and then they've got North Carolina on Saturday. So it's basically a 2-game swing against the ACC. I want to say Michigan State is also going to be playing North Carolina and Duke, but this is about Michigan and not Michigan State, so I digress on that. Then Michigan heads back to Ann Arbor for its own Michigan Challenge, which will be against Mississippi State in Bowling Green. So this is actually a 2 separate day event. So they've got Mississippi State on Friday, September 16th, and then they've got Bowling Green on Sunday. So Mississippi State is an interesting opponent. They just had themselves a phenomenal year. That's probably their match to circle on their schedule, because that Mississippi State matchup is a fairly interesting matchup, considering Mississippi State had himself a very great season last year, and they're going to look to build off that as they take on a Big Ten foe. The Bowling Green matchup can be sneaky good just because Bowling Green they did make the NCAA tournament, and I definitely think they have potential. My thing is that Michigan is probably going to overpower them just because they have a loaded roster, and Bowling Green isn't really the perennial powerhouse that is like Wisconsin or Nebraska. Compare Michigan to Bowling Green is like comparing gummy worms to Trident gum. It's not really comparable. Yes, they're candy, but you know what I mean. You can't compare Michigan and Bowling Green. That's what I'm trying to say. So that's actually the end of Michigan's non-conference schedule. It's kind of I wouldn't say it's an underwhelming conference schedule. However, it's not really the strongest. You're only playing a few NCAA tournament teams. You're playing Michigan State, Mississippi State, which I think is a great matchup, and they're playing North Carolina, which is also very good. The Duke matchup also looks sneaky good, and then Loyola is also decent, but that's pretty much where the buck stops. It's like, Michigan didn't really have it doesn't have, on paper, a good non-conference schedule. I think it's rather an average one at best. I'm not trying to say it's bad by any sort of way, but overall, I just think it could have been a little bit better. Maybe Michigan State could be rescheduled. Well, I don't think they can. But maybe they just couldn't find any matchups which basically fit the bill, or they couldn't find anyone to, play them, which to me is a little disappointing, but it is what it is for Michigan. I think Michigan will be just fine, so we'll see what happens with them going forward. So, jumping on over to the ACC, we have Wake Forest women's volleyball team releasing their schedule. So, for me, I think Wake Forest was one of those teams that was decent last year, but not decent enough to make the NCAA tournament. Their season opener begins in North Carolina as they play... Sorry about that. So, they actually start the season at home against North Carolina Central, and then on Saturday they play Western Carolina and Kennesaw State. That is going to be in Reynolds Gymnasium at the Gymnasium of Wake Forest. So basically they have their own little mini tournament where they're playing 3 teams from pretty much their neck of the woods. Then the schedule starts to pick up for Wake Forest. They have Arizona at Chapel Hill, which I think it's not going to be on their home court, but it is basically going to be at a neutral site. They're playing Arizona, which had themselves a decent season. They just didn't make the postseason, whether it was NCAA or NIVC. But I think Wake Forest Arizona could be sneaky good, if you ask me. I really think that has potential to having some decency, especially since both those teams play in Power 5 conferences. And then the following day, Wake Forest plays South Carolina at home, which I think it's going to be a somewhat good matchup. South Carolina had themselves a great season last year. They didn't win an NCAA tournament game, but I think that could be a great challenge for Wake Forest going into this non-conference schedule. Then Wake Forest heads out to San Marcos, Texas for the Texas State Invitational. They play Ole Miss and Sam Houston on September 10th, which is a Saturday. I think the Ole Miss matchup is going to be a fun matchup. I think Ole Miss presents somewhat of a challenge to Wake Forest. The Sam Houston one isn't as challenging, if that can be considered a word, but I think it's an okay matchup. I think it's okay. And then Texas State is the last matchup for Wake Forest at the San Marcos, or the Texas State Invitational. I think for me, Texas State is that perennial team from the I'm blanking on Sun Belt Conference. They're that perennial powerhouse team from the Sun Belt Conference. I was blanking on the conference name. That does really good every single year. Last year was kind of an exception just because they had that one loss in the Sun Belt Conference tournament, and then they could not qualify. They didn't really make the NCAA tournament just because it's tough to make an NCAA tournament when you're not a Power 5 team. But overall, I think it's going to be a great test for Wake Forest and Texas State. Then Wake Forest has the UNCC Invitational. They play Davidson on September 16th, a Friday. Then they play UNCC in Charlotte on Saturday. Then Wake Forest jumps into ACC play, and right off the bat, they get a real tough challenge. They're hitting the road to Atlanta and Georgia to take on Georgia Tech, which I think that's going to be a very tough matchup. Then a couple days after, Wake Forest heads down to Clemson to take on Clemson. Then Wake Forest has their first home game in ACC play against Syracuse. They follow that up with home matchups against Boston College on October 2nd. And then October 7th, they have North Carolina. And then they close off their home slate against North Carolina State on October 9th. Then Wake Forest hits the road to South Bend to take on Notre Dame. And then a couple days after, they play at Louisville. This is where the schedule starts to really pick up. They have 5 very tough games. And then Wake Forest plays another NCAA tournament team that won an NCAA tournament game. They play Miami on October 21st, which is 5 days after they played Louisville. And then they play at Florida State on October 23rd. Wake Forest does return home. However, they play a very challenging Pitt team on October 28th, 5 days after they return from their road trip. And then 2 days after they play Pitt, they play Virginia, which has improved as well. Wake Forest also has this weird Wednesday game at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg. And then on Sunday, which will be 4 days after they play Virginia Tech, November 6th, Wake Forest plays Duke. Then, I wouldn't say the following, or I'm sorry, not the following Wednesday. The following Sunday, they play Virginia Tech in Winston-Salem, and then they have Duke on a Wednesday. So it basically goes Virginia Tech, Duke, Virginia Tech, Duke. So expect Wake Forest to be focusing a lot on those two teams. And then on November 20th, Wake Forest plays Virginia, and then November 25th, Wake Forest ends its regular season against Clemson. So the bulk of their schedule is pretty much in the middle of the season. Like, they obviously open up the season against Georgia Tech, but then they have some semi-winnable games against Clemson, Syracuse, and Boston College. Now, a lot could happen in this time span, and a lot could happen in terms of transfers and whatnot, but Wake Forest did bring in some promising transfers this year, but like I said, back to the schedule, Wake Forest has a majority of its tough opponents in the middle of ACC play when they play Notre Dame, Louisville, Miami, Florida State, and Pitt. Other than that, it looks like a manageable schedule as Wake Forest can manage against some of these opponents. My only concern for Wake Forest is, can they get the job done, and can they maintain a 500 record, and can they maintain its good positioning in the ACC. That still remains to be seen. If they could challenge the powers of the ACC, then honestly, I think they could make the NCAA tournament. We shall see, though. Time will tell. So then the last team to preview or break down their early schedule is Dayton. So Dayton is a perennial NCAA tournament team. They do such a great job year in and year out. Their start to the season will be in the Cincinnati tournament when, right off the bat, they face a interstate rival in Cincinnati. That's going to be a very interesting matchup right there, just because you always love that little interstate rivalry between two teams, Cincinnati and Dayton. And then the following day, Dayton plays Florida State, which that's an NCAA tournament team that won a tournament game from last season. I think it's going to be a very good matchup right there. And then Dayton closes out the tournament against Illinois State. Dayton then heads down to the ATL for the Georgia Tech tournament as they face Arizona State on Friday, September 2nd. And then they also face Georgia Tech in the late cap game that same day as well. That Georgia Tech-Dayton game is going to be a huge test for Dayton. Dayton is really going to have to bring its A game to stop Julia Bergman. Dayton then closes out the Georgia Tech tournament against Florida International. Dayton has its first non-tournament game, but they will be in Muncie, Indiana when they take on Ball State. Now, Ball State is an NCAA tournament team from this past season that won their first tournament match since the 90s. I think it's going to be a great matchup. It's got a great storyline. It's a non-Power 5 NCAA tournament a non-Power 5 perennial NCAA tournament team matchup. Now, Ball State hasn't really had the NCAA tournament success as Dayton has, but I think it's going to be a great matchup just because Ball State returns a good portion of its starters, and Dayton always has a great team year in and year out. The following week later on in the week, Dayton has the Dayton Invitational once they return from Muncie, Indiana, as they play Villanova on Friday, and then they also play Missouri State and Illinois on Saturday. This is from September 9th all the way to September 10th. Then Dayton has the Wright State tournament when they play Wright State on Friday, and then they play Wichita State on Saturday. Then Dayton kicks off A10 conference play with 2 matches against Fordham on the road on September 23rd and 24th. The week after, Dayton returns home to take on Davidson on September 30th and October 1st. And then, interestingly enough, Dayton has, I'm going to butcher this name, I can't pronounce that. I'm just going to call it Duquesne. I can't pronounce it. Either way, they're playing Duquesne on Tuesday. That's a very interesting game just because Dayton is playing DU on Tuesday. And then Dayton has 2 other matchups from the A10 on Friday at George Mason, which I think is going to be quite interesting. That's Friday and Saturday. So Dayton's got a busy week that week with DU, as well as hitting the road to Fairfax to take on George Mason. And then Dayton will remain in Virginia when they play VCU on October 14th and 15th. And then the following week, Dayton returns home to take on George Washington on October 21st and 22nd. Then Dayton plays DU on Tuesday, October 25th in Pittsburgh. And then Dayton will remain on the road to take on St. Louis on Friday and Saturday, October 28th and 29th. So it's another busy week. So it seems like DU is Dayton's big-time rival, which I think is definitely fitting that they don't play on a back-to-back basis. Dayton then has Loyola of Chicago on November 4th and 5th on a Friday and Saturday. And then Dayton closes out the regular season against Rhode Island at home on November 11th and 12th, which, of course, is a Friday and Saturday. The A10 tournament is on November 18th through November 20th, which I think is going to be an interesting tournament. I definitely think DU and Dayton can headline that tournament as the top 2 teams, but I wouldn't sleep on some of the other teams as well. Definitely don't sleep on Loyola. Definitely don't sleep on Fordham. you never know what can happen, but I definitely think DU and Dayton are the teams to watch for in the A10 tournament. So that is that for the schedule breakdowns of Dayton and Wake Forest, as well as the non-conference schedule breakdown for Michigan. So now we jump on into the NVA, and we're finally at the NVA, and then I'll send you all on your way to prepare for Marcus Lowe's great show, Gloves Off. So the NVA has event number 3. Going into event number 3, we have in the National Coastal Conference, Team Freedom in first place. Well, the National Coastal Division, we have Team Freedom at 4-0, the Orange County Stunners at 2-2, and the Seattle Sasquatch at 0-4. The National Central Division consists of the Texas Tyrants at 4-0, the Los Angeles Blaze at 3-1, and the Chicago Untouchables at 0-4. Then the American Coastal Division consists of the Las Vegas Ramblers at 3-1, Southern Exposure at 1-3, and the Ontario Matadors at 1-3. Then the American Central Division consists of the Colorado Kraken, the Dallas Tornadoes, and the Utah Stingers, all at 2-2, which I think is the most balanced out division in all of the NVA. And I like that division parity. I like how there's one team that is I like how there's all 3 teams that are equal to one another. And I think that's going to be really interesting going forward. Now jumping on over to the matchups this weekend. All these matches will be taking place at the Pierce Sports Center in Rancho San Bernardino. So the first matchup begins with the Ontario Matadors, or the Inland Empire Matadors, the host team, taking on the Utah Stingers. So that is the battle of two different teams. We have the Stingers that are 2-2, trying to find some identity to their game, and then we also have the Matadors, which are kind of bringing up the rear in the American Coastal Division. So it's basically the battle of 2 different teams of 2 different aspects of their season. The next matchup is probably the matchup to watch for. This is probably the matchup of the weekend right here. Team Freedom taking on the Texas Tyrants. I was blanking on their name earlier in my intro, but the Texas Tyrants are both 4-0 along with Team Freedom. I think this is going to be a very good matchup. I'm really looking forward to seeing both these 4-0 teams do battle. Unfortunately, I'm going to be at work, so I'm not going to be able to watch them, but I'm probably going to be able to watch them in terms of the replay. Later on that day, we have the Las Vegas Ramblers taking on the Los Angeles Blaze. So the Ramblers and the Blaze, I don't think anyone predicted both these teams being 3-1. Not at least for the Blaze's sake, but I'm not trying to say the Blaze isn't a deserving 3-1, but I don't think anyone had them at 3-1 as of right now. I think it's rather impressive that the Blaze are 3-1. But now they get a true test in the Ramblers. I really think the Ramblers are going to bring it, but it's too early to tell. And then closing out the May 28 matches, we have the Orange County Stunners taking on the Colorado Kraken at 6 p.m. So this is the battle of 2-2 teams. Try saying that 5 times fast. I'm not going to, though. So it's the battle of 2-2 teams, as this is the battle of the reigning NVA champion versus the newcomer of this year, the Colorado Kraken. I think this is going to be a great matchup. I really think Orange County is going to want to get back on track. They definitely have a talented team, but they kind of haven't been living up to the expectations. Yes, they don't have Nick Amato anymore, as he is now a volunteer assistant coach for Long Beach State, but it doesn't mean they should be playing, or they will continue to be playing, average. I think they're eventually going to kickstart their game. And then starting off the May 29th matches, we have the Utah Stingers taking on Team Freedom. It's the battle of the 2 OG teams, as both these teams were the originator teams, as Team Freedom, depending on what happens in their first game of the season, could be looking to improve from their 5-0 record, but we'll see. The Stingers definitely need this win in the worst way. I think getting at least one win would be huge for Utah. I definitely think they could beat the Matadors, no offense to Ontario, but honestly, Team Freedom could be a whole nother story, but you never know with the Stingers. Like, the Stingers are that team that no one can really figure out. Sometimes they have themselves a great win, and then they follow that up with a not-so-great loss, and then vice versa. So, overall, we'll see what Utah can bring to the table. And then the Texas Tyrants take on the Ontario Matadors at noon Pacific time on Saturday. I think this is going to be a fairly interesting game. I really think Texas is going to mow down Ontario. No offense to Ontario, but Texas is just so loaded. Gianluca Grasso just continues to just do great things for the Tyrants. I want to say he's one of the kill leaders in the NVA so far. I'll have to double check that, but depending on what happens in Friday's matchup against Team Freedom, I think the Tyrants can definitely chalk this one up as a win. Like, it all depends on what their opponent brings. As long as Texas doesn't have like a hangover from the previous night. Just because it's so easy to get caught up in big matches from the night before, and then you have another match, and it's a quick turnaround, and it's like, oh my gosh, we're playing this team, we gotta turn it around real quick. So that is that for that little matchup right there. In the 3 p.m. slot, we have Southern Exposure taking on the Dallas Tornadoes. So this is going to be an interesting matchup right here, just because Southern Exposure is not where they want to be. Obviously, it's a long season, but we're halfway through the NVA season, as Southern Exposure is only 1-3, while Dallas is 2-2. Dallas has aspirations of winning the American Central Division, while Southern Exposure is trying to get their you-know-whats together so that they can keep up with Las Vegas, just because it only gets tougher from here on out. So, following and closing out the Saturday matchups, we have the Seattle Sasquatch versus the Chicago Untouchables. Something's got to give when it comes to this winless matchup. This is the battle of two winless teams. Seattle is still looking for its first win as an NVA program, while the Chicago Untouchables are still looking for their first win of the season. They've had rotten luck this season. They have come close to winning certain matches, but they've pretty much fallen in 5 sets, which is such a bummer for them, and I really feel bad for Chicago, just because most of their matches, they have not been at full strength. So, something's got to give here, and someone will be celebrating their first win of the season. So, for Chicago, on the other hand, May 30th has them having a quick turnaround, as the Chicago Untouchables will be taking on Southern Exposure, which it's another one of those something's gotta give matchups. Will Southern Exposure be breaking its losing streak should they not beat Dallas, or will the Chicago Untouchables be getting their first win of the season? Or will one team be winning its second game of the season? Or will one team be winning its second game of the season? Or will one team be looking to cap off a perfect 2-0 this event? Either way, we have ourselves quite the interesting storyline with Southern Exposure and Chicago Untouchables. And then on the noon or the 12 p.m. slot, we have the Dallas Tornadoes versus the Seattle Sasquatch. Now, Seattle obviously is looking to build on its program. Obviously, they're still in their infancy stage, even though they have 4 matches under their belts. Dallas, on the other hand, is another one of those young teams. They're only in their second year as an NVA program. Like I said, Dallas has aspirations to possibly, hence the word possibly, become division champions. In order to do so, they'll have to get past a interesting Sasquatch team, which I think could go either way. I think the Tornadoes matchup versus the Sasquatch matchup could go either way. But that's just my take. Then on the 3 p.m. slot game, we have the Colorado Kraken versus the Las Vegas Ramblers. So this is another one of those interesting matchups. Like I said, with Dallas, Colorado has aspirations to becoming division champions, while the Ramblers are still trying to continue their vice grip on their division. I really think the Ramblers can come out with a win, but you never want to underestimate the Kraken. The Kraken have some studs on their team, and the Kraken is coming off of a 2-0 event from a couple weeks ago. I really think Colorado can give the Ramblers a run for their money, but you never want to sleep on Sin City. And then the last match of the weekend is the Los Angeles Blaze versus the Orange County Stunners. Orange County versus Los Angeles, it never gets old when it comes to any sort of volleyball, whether it's in high school, whether it's in junior college, whether it's in college, or whether it's in the NVA. It's always a battle when it comes to Orange County versus Los Angeles. So the Stunners entering this weekend are 2-2, while the Blaze are 3-1. This is definitely a very tough weekend for the Blaze. I really think that the Blaze are going to have to bring their A game this weekend just because they're facing two giants. They're facing the two teams that actually made the finals last weekend. So, not last weekend, the finals last year in the NVA finals. So, for the Blaze, this is kind of where the schedule starts to pick up, and they're really going to have to bring it. I think they can, just because Charles Belvin has been doing wonders for them. But the Stunners also have good players such as Matt Hilling, which returns from last year's championship team. Overall, I think it's going to be a great matchup between the Blaze and the Stunners. This is another one of those two OG teams that originated when the NVA first came out. Because remember, there were 8 NVA teams, then it went up to 10, now it's currently at 12. And I can definitely see the NVA continuing to grow. Who knows, maybe we'll get a team from Alabama. We'll see. We shall see. I digress, though. So, that is pretty much the NVA schedule right there. Like I said, the matchup I'm definitely looking forward to is Team Freedom versus the Texas Tyrants. I think that's going to basically be the battle of the best. I think that is the best matchup this weekend. And whoever comes out on top could definitely stay 6-0 going into Saturday's slate of matches. As the Tyrants have the Matadors, which have only won one match. And then Team Freedom has the Utah Stingers. I definitely think Team Freedom has the tougher schedule this weekend just because the Stingers are relatively good. And then obviously the Tyrants are very good. So I really think that this weekend is going to test Team Freedom. But who knows? Maybe they'll bring out that Jersey grit like NJIT did. We'll see. But overall, that is going to do it for the NVA. Before we get out of here, we do have to go over some big NCAA men's volleyball news, as Pepperdine has announced its new men's volleyball coach. As their new men's volleyball coach is none other than... I'm not going to do a drum roll. Jonathan Winder. He is a former NCAA champion and a former National Player of the Year for Pepperdine, which is quite nice. I'm glad Pepperdine hired one of their own, which I think makes quite a bit of sense. And first and foremost, Winder thanks President Jim Gash and Steve Potts, and he says, as an alum, I am grateful to David Hunt for his coaching of the Pepperdine teams over the past decade. The program is in good hands thanks to his tremendous efforts. And he also thanks Marv Dunphy, the director, or the former coach of Pepperdine men's volleyball, who believed in me since I was a scrawny 16-year-old kid from Irvine. I cannot wait to be back in the office with him leading the men of this program and continuing to bring pride to the Faithful Waves alumni. I think this is a great hire for Pepperdine. They hired one of their own. This is a former National Player of the Year, and I think Winder can definitely bring a lot to the table for Pepperdine. I really think that Pepperdine has that potential. But it's way too early to be looking that far ahead to the MPSF, because the MPSF is stacked. You have USC, which is going to be returning quite a bit of players, and they have a bunch of newcomers coming in. You have UCLA, which has a lot of players returning. So for Pepperdine, they have their new head coach. They are the reigning MPSF champions in terms of the tournament. I really think that Pepperdine has what it takes we shall see what they can do. Marv Dunphy does say, Jonathan is one of the finest young coaches in our sport. He knows the game at the highest level, and more importantly, he has the gift to teach it at the highest level. He is solid in every way, and I've never worked with a better person. What you see is what you get, and that's not always the way in our business. He is a wonderful young man. And he also played professionally in France, Germany, Greece, and Romania. He was also a member of the U.S. national team from 2007 all the way to 2012. And he also helped the U.S. finish first in the 2007 Pan Am Games. And he also helped them finish second in 2009 in the Pan Am Games, as well as sixth in the FIVB World Championships. So, good stuff right there. I like the resume already. So, I really think Pepperdine hit a home run with this hire, especially since it's an alum. Like, hiring alums is definitely a great build for the culture, especially with a pedigree that much. Like, with a resume like that, that is definitely a great hire right there. So, I really think Pepperdine has what it takes to win some games next year. I really think that Pepperdine has that potential. It's just all about what their recruiting class can bring in, what their returners can bring forth, and overall, if they can maintain that consistency when it comes to the NPSF. Just because the NPSF is a bloodbath, it's just a war every single night from top to bottom. For the most part, mostly. And then you also have to wonder who's going to be replacing Jalen Jasper next year, just because Jalen Jasper is a talent unmatched. And then also, how will they be replacing some of their other seniors that graduated? So, it's still a mystery on who's going to be taking the place of who. And also replacing Austin Wilmot will be tough, but replacing Jalen Jasper is going to take some time. So, we'll see. We shall see. So that is that for that NCAA men's volleyball news. And ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for this week's episode of Set Point. Without any further delay, let us drop that beat, because I'm about to dip like a banana in chocolate. You feel me? Thank you everyone for tuning in to Set Point. I really do appreciate you all tuning in. If you listen live, I appreciate you. If you listen on playback, I appreciate you. If you listen at work, I appreciate you. If you listen at any time, any place, anywhere, I really appreciate you. Shout out to my boy Davidson Crooks in the chat room. I definitely do appreciate you tuning in. Shout out to those that continue to support Set Point. I really do appreciate you, because without your support, Set Point is not enough. For everyone here at IU,